who are joining us on YouTube. I am excited to have yet another session with you guys. Uh, we've had some technical difficulties today. And so that's kind of one of the reasons that we are late. And also, there is a potential that the Zoom meeting might close. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and thank you for your patience. If we have to have a part 2 and a part 3 to this just to get through this, we will. My thought process on this is that this is an important enough message that whatever we've got to do to get it onto YouTube to you guys and communicated to you, I'm going to do. So let me say a few things right off the bat. The first one is that obviously you guys have probably noticed, if you have watched a number of our videos or if you've listened, you subscribed and listened, that we're a little bit off the beaten path of what traditional Christianity would be. I named the name of Christ, and I understand Romans 10:9, right? If you believe with your heart and confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, then and that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved, right? And all who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved, Romans 10:13. So please understand that as I grind at Christianity, I am still a Christian. And I want you to know that I am still a Christian in the sense of what the first century Christians were. Now, I'm going to say something here. There are other ministries out there who claim to have aligned themselves with first century Christianity. But as we're going to find today, that is probably pretty far from the case. Now, addressing the Torah observant Hebrew roots, whole Bible believer groups, I want you to understand, by me identifying as a Christian, some of you instantaneously are probably clicking the YouTube off. For those of you who have stayed, you need to understand you are a Christian too. But it is time to really try to identify what that means. So there's a couple very important points that we need to get to today. There is a philosophy present in Torah observant communities that there are different levels of learning of Torah. Furthermore, the rabbis teach that there's 70 facets of wisdom for every word in Torah, right? The principle is that there are 32 paths to enlightenment, and in all of that there is still this idea that in mainstream Christianity that we're going to interpret the Bible literally, and that's how it has to be. Okay. So a couple things I want to do. I want to try to see if I can help you alter your paradigm a little bit, but also I'm going to confront those who think that they have, they think that they have their path figured out and all that. And when I say confront those, what I mean is I'm going to kind of get in your face a little bit. So the first thing that we need to do is probably establish some sort of groundwork with this. And when I say that, what I mean is that I think maybe we need to kind of define the theology that is communicated with Scripture versus the theology that has both Greek philosophical infiltration and Roman pagan infiltration and Celtic and Germanic pagan infiltration. What do I mean by infiltration? I mean that pagans came in and took over and then said, oh, we don't have to follow that rule anymore because I am the vicar of Christ, or we don't have to follow that rule anymore because I am the king. And this is actually how we're going to translate this verse. Now, I want you to understand, there are two things that are absolutely important you need to know about me. Number one is that my relationship with God is my relationship with God overrides all other things. In other words, I don't care whether you get offended. I don't care whether you want to continue to be my friend because you hear something that you don't like. My service and my walk to God has been such that I have accepted the fact that I'm different. I've accepted the fact that he has shown me things that are just not part of mainstream traditional Christianity. I have accepted the fact that I have lost friends because of that. I've accepted the fact that I have had fights with family because of that. And I have definitely accepted the fact that there are a lot of people who consider someone like me to be a radical or whatever. Why do I bring this up? Because what you need to understand is that when I sought these truths, I wasn't seeking them for you. I have no interest in teaching you them. I had an interest in finding a path that was pure to walk before my God. What does that mean? That means we could argue all day about whether or not some verse says something about Torah to the negative or to the positive. But in the end, I have my own relationship and walk with God. And these are the things that I've learned. And this is the path I'm going to walk. And you know what? If you don't like it, if you don't want it, if you don't understand it, we can get through that. The reason why I'm preambling this is because this message makes me nervous. I got confirmation on it probably, I don't know, Tuesday night, or maybe it was Wednesday night. I can't remember. But I can tell you that basically there was this moment where it was like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to teach this because it's controversial. But let's establish some things. First of all, let me say this. You have the intensification of all power in the universe in some way, shape, or form, manifesting himself in such a way that there's a seating on a throne in the vision of John. Okay. When I say manifest, that's probably not the best word. He is materializing himself, okay, out of nothing into something tangible that we can understand. Father, husband, king, right? Okay. And we know King of Kings, Lord of Lords, right? Holy, 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 worthy is the Lamb who was slain. So before we go any further, one of the most important things that we need to establish is who says he's worthy? Does a book that took 600 years to compile legitimately have the authority in your life to determine whether or not God is worthy? That's the question. Does a book that started in the Hebrew language, translated to the Aramaic, translated to the Greek, and then to Germanic, then to Latin, then to Germanic, and then to English, have a place in the authority of determining whether the intensification of all power in the universe is worthy? Unfortunately, not in my book. And why do I say that? I say that because he gave us free will, right? One of the four human endowments is willfulness or willpower, the ability to choose. If I go to a dealership and I have a red car, a green car, and a blue car, and they're all the same price, I'm going to choose the blue car. Can't stand red, can't stand green. And so what does that mean? That means that I can choose. So in the process of everything, one of the things we need to understand is that when we're talking about the intensification of all power in the universe, whom we unfortunately have adapted the Germanic word Gott, G-O with two dots above it, T-T, which is God for us in Middle English, and then, of course, Modern English. That thing, how worthy truly is he? And what I mean by that is when I'm talking about an entity, why do I choose him? Why do I choose that God? Now, I'm using the word God, even though that I know it's inappropriate to, because you will not get it unless I say the word God. If I say Elohim, you might come close. If I say Lord, you might come close. But if I say Yahweh Elohim, you will be off over here and I will be here, and you will still be in this God thing, right? Because why? Because we have had that kind of programming. We've been told this is the title for this entity, right? And of course, if you play video games or you watch fantasy movies, there's all kinds of gods, right? There's all kinds of gods. And so why is that important? That's important because when we are dealing with this mess that we call a life, we are either missing important information or we are assuming information that may or may not be true. The dysfunction here goes deep. So let's start at the very beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But the truth is this adaptation of a subject, verb, object type of speech seems to be a later adaptation of Hebrew. Let me explain to you what I mean by that, okay? Let's go ahead and let's go to the whiteboard for a minute. Grammar plays a huge role in our language. So in the English language, if I was to say, I'm going to throw a ball, okay? So throw is our verb, right? Throw equals verb. I equals the subject. Okay. And the ball equals the object. This is how we deal with grammar in any language. Okay. But in English, we don't say throw eyeball, right? We don't. We say let's see, let's do this. We say I throw the ball. This is how we think. This is how we speak. Okay. And English is English is a derivation of an ancient language called Proto-Indo-European. Okay, and English is kind of a conglomerate of Germanic, really technically Dutch, Germanic, and Latin, and some Middle Eastern verbs and whatnot. But in Hebrew, we say verb. Okay, so let's see. Let's label this English. Okay. And let's label this verb, subject, object. And we're going to label this Hebrew. Okay. So we kind of talk like Yoda, right? We say, throw I the ball, right? Throw I the ball. Well, this development of verb, subject, object has been called into question in numerous scholarships as to whether or not the subject, verb, and object are actually different things. Okay, so I'm going to show you something really quick, and we're going to discuss it. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll just go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And what we're going to go ahead and do is we are going to, let's see. Let me put this on this for a second. Okay. What we're going to do is we are going to take a look at the grammar of the first verse in Genesis. Okay. I have a connection issue here. Okay. So, okay. So in the Hebrew, let's do this. Let's do side by side. We'll do NLT on one side and Westminster Leningrad Codex on the other side. So we have Breshit bara. Okay. So this is in beginning, right? In beginning, not in the beginning, but in beginning. Bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Okay. Now, the relevance here is that when we say in beginning, then the next thing that happens is there's this bara. Okay. Now, most scholars will then say, okay, this current grammar, let me show you that real quick on the board. Let's see, let's just go to another page. So we'll just write the word bara here. All right. And what you need to know is that even though that this is in lexical form and technically would mean to create, right? That's going to be the definition that's in the lexicon, to create, right? This is actually perfect, okay? Perfect, meaning what? Past tense, okay? Masculine, meaning what? It was a male who did it, okay? And what? Singular, so it is a singular male. And what? It is third person. So this isn't a man who's saying I, right? This isn't a man who is, this isn't somebody saying you and be referring to a man. This is literally he created. Now, the question is, who created? Well, if we go with the normal verb subject object, we seem to have that flow here. Bara, who? Elohim, right? Et hashamayim. What's the et? What's the aleph and tav? That is the definite direct object. Let me talk to you a moment about what that means. When we're talking about the definite direct object, in Hebrew, if they want to identify something as definite and direct, they use the et in front of it to show that it is the direct object of the verb. Let me explain to you what an indirect object is. If I have a ball and I throw that ball, right? When I throw that ball, I am the subject, right? The ball is the object, right? But if I throw that ball at a person to catch it, they are the indirect object. So for some reason in Hebrew grammar, in order to identify the ball, we put an aleph tav in front of the word. Okay. Now there's a depth to the teaching of the aleph tav. In fact, the first time I ever actually had my congregation feel lost is when I did a teaching on the aleph and tav. So I am cautious to encroach upon it, but as a grammar technique, the object is not definite without, and when I say definite, that means the, right? Direct is what? It's the verb is happening upon the thing, okay? So it's interesting because then what we have is we have a question as to what or who did this thing. Well, of course, in most cases, this is going to be Elohim as the interpreted thing. However, and this is important, that doesn't necessarily always jive in Hebrew grammar. What does that mean? That means that sometimes the the noun that follows is not the subject of the verb. It's kind of ambiguous in Hebrew. What does that mean? It is very possible that the subject, when there's emphasis needed, goes before the verb. Okay. Now, the reason why I am bringing this up is because when we look at this, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, we have a tendency to instantaneously accept that whenever we see God, it is something greater than ourselves. And most likely, if we accept good theology, it is greater than everything. And we've already determined that there is an intensification of all power in the universe. What does that mean? There is a place in reality where there is an energy exponentially increasing in intensity and then emanating outward. We talked about it last week when we talked about that idea of the dummying down of power. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we have assigned God to a Hebrew ambiguous grammar. What does that mean? Let's look back over here. This could be the subject of the verb, or this could be the subject of the verb. Now, here's how I want you to think about this. It could read like this. In beginning. What's beginning? We don't know, right? We know it comes from the root word rosh, which means head. Now bear with me. Means head. This. Okay? It doesn't mean the start. It doesn't mean the top. It means a head. The drawing is of a human head. But that's literal, right? What if we were to accept that then that's the mind? What if we accept then that it's the top of the body? That's where we get the problem with idiomatic languages. Let me explain to you what I mean by idiomatic languages. Idiomatic languages use idioms only to describe their world. In English, if I say spill the beans, okay? So what does that mean to us? If somebody spills the beans, what does that mean? Somebody told a secret, right? So now spill the beans does not mean that we have accidentally dumped some beans or accidentally, had a container of beans dump over or something, right? In our minds, we instantaneously assign spill the beans to a secret. But I can tell you that we will also say, oh, this person told a secret. We will speak literally. The secret was communicated to the wrong person. That's spilling the beans, right? But in Hebrew, there is no actual statement of, oh, this person told a secret. It will always be spill the beans. What does that mean? That means your first word in your Bible is an idiom. How so? Because the Hebrew word rosh does not mean anything other than head. But it can be the head of a clan. It can be the head of time. It can be the head of a thing of grain. Why? Because of that idiomatic process. So now all of a sudden we don't really know what Bereshit means in the Hebrew. We assume that our translators did a good job of telling us what it is. And you can go into the JPS Tanakh, all right? We're not just talking about Christians with a bias and some sort of doctrinal distortion when they interpret things. This is even in the JPS Tanakh, Jewish Publication Society Tanakh, says in the beginning. And then it's repeated again in John the same way. Unfortunately, if we go into Septuagint and we look at John in the Greek, we find that it doesn't say in the beginning, it says in beginning. Okay? In beginning. Now, two things that are very important. First, you have to remember that they were giving, okay, so please understand, the nations that surrounded Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were messed up enough that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were not allowed to get a bride from the land of Canaan. Okay? That's important. And so when we're talking about the dysfunction of the nations or Gentiles, we are talking about a screwed up people. Okay. Now, there's certain Christians who say, yeah, that's the point, right? I mean, that's why Christ had to come, because we were so screwed up. Well, yes, amen, but it's important to understand everything that is involved in that statement. But moving on, we know that even though it says in the beginning, even in the Greek, which is an inappropriate version of the Tanakh, it says in beginning. We know that the word beginning is an idiom, like let the cat out of the bag, spill the beans, knock the ball out of the park, right? Raining cats and dogs. We don't understand that there, in its literal sense, is actually a human head. And in the ancient pictographic drawings, it was the drawing of a human head enough so that no matter how you look at that letter or that word, because the resh is the rosh, right? It's just a different pronunciation. But the principle is that it is this idea of the head, the brain, the mind, the skull, the thing on top of the neck. Okay? But in an idiomatic sense, it is beginning. What does that mean? Well, if it said in the beginning, then we could use beginning as a title, but it doesn't. It doesn't say the beginning in the Hebrew. It doesn't. It is ambiguous. It says in beginning. So beginning starts to become a very different kind of noun, not a title, possibly even a proper noun, right? Possibly even a name. Okay, so why is that important? Because if we were to accept, now I know there's a bunch of conjecture here, but if we were to accept that beginning or the source or the start of everything, where everything comes from, is the subject of the verb, then Elohim starts to become something different. The word God gets dropped from the thing. So literally what we say is in source, he created. Who created? Source, right? What did he create? Powers, right? That's the proper interpretation of Elohim. He created powers. What powers? The heavens and the earth. Okay, so now the heavens are a power, the earth is a power. Why is this so important? Because it eliminates that God from the subject where it shouldn't be. Why? Because he says, let the earth bring forth life. Now, granted, if he commands something to do something, he's already enabled it to do it. Meaning what? The earth had power to create. I want you humans, just for a moment, to let go of all of your religious rhetoric. Let go of your assumptions about what you think you understand about God. In fact, for a moment, let's let God go. And let's just get into reality. A man and a woman come together, and if everything is in the right place at the right time, what happens? A life is created. Does God have anything to do with that? And what I mean by that is, can you say that there is any process within the creation of that life that seems to have a supernatural element to it? The answer is no. Science has proven to us that we literally transfer life in a cellular process into a new life. Cellular process from the mother, the egg. Cellular process from the father, the seed. Those two coming together then become a new human. There is nothing supernatural about that. However, we are clearly somehow linked into the supernatural. Now, people say, "Oh, well, wait a minute, there's a flash of light at the beginning of everything." Well, we've identified that that's zinc. By the way, zinc is one of the things in your computers. Okay, so in that thought process, what I'm trying to say is instead of creating this mythological fantasy about reality, let's accept what we have in front of us and then try to understand what was really going on or what is being communicated. And it's simply this: humans have the ability to create life, and that life is spiritual. Meaning what? We have more power than what we are willing to admit. Now, as a reductionist, we can say, oh, yeah, it's cellular, blah, blah, blah. But because you have walked this walk spiritually enough, right? I'm not dealing with new Christians here. I very rarely am. But even if I am, even a new Christian has experienced something beyond themselves. Heck, we even have people who are atheists who have an addiction to something, who go into some sort of program, accept some semblance of a higher power. That's spiritual. In fact, what is the spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, right? Just saying, spiritual. Meaning what? We are creating spiritual beings. Oh, I'm probably stepping on some toes here. I know I am. I know that this is probably just really, really frustrating to you, because I'm practically claiming that God does not play a role in the creation of life, but that there is a supernatural being created and we're the ones making it. So there's two ways we could look at this. Either A, I'm claiming that we have the same power as God. Or I am claiming that we have been enabled to do something that we don't even realize that we are able to do. Now, there is definite scientific proof that when there is a separation of man and woman and there isn't a coming together, that both of them re-energize. Okay? There's a buildup of vitality in the man and woman not coming together. And then when there's a coming together, there's a loss of that vitality. Now, natural order process says what? We are supposed to preserve our species. Remember, as mammals, we have the instinctual process of what? Self-preservation, herd instinct, and reproduction. And in that process of reproduction, there's a sentiment of needing to come together. But in that, there's a spiritual experience that occurs that not one of you who understands what I'm talking about can deny. And that also has to do with love. That also has to do with bonding and connection, right? We can go into all that. And of course, then we could go back to the reductionists and say, oh, well, that's oxytocin. But the problem is we still are spiritual beings. We still experience this stuff that's otherworldly, and we can't explain it. Even the atheists have had to concede intelligent design, albeit some people are agnostic, some people lean in the direction of being deists, etc. In the end, there's an exception, or there's an acceptance that there's something greater. Now we see in this Genesis scripture, I will remind you what it says. Breshit bara Elohim. I've got Elohim highlighted. There is a temptation to translate that word as God, but it is not necessarily that way. Just as much as there's an ambiguity in the word Breshit, there's an ambiguity in whether that's the subject or the object of the verb. If it was that he created powers, that explains why it is actually in the plural. Because it's not what? It is not an actual title of God. It is a noun that is describing the two things that are about to be created, which is the heavens and the earth. And we have both of those things, the heavens and the earth, containing some sort of energy, power, creative ability. Albeit there's only one entity in the existence of creation that can create a life that is a spiritual being. That's humans. I know that this is hard, but I want you to get your mind wrapped around the idea that we need to take the God out of that area and put it where it belongs, in the source or in the head, right? Let's say that we just go with that there is a idiomatic head in the cosmos that thinks, has intention, and is the intensification of all power in the universe. I know this would be hard for you to receive because your whole entire life you've been told that that's how it's read. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But really, it could potentially read, without any violations of grammar and without any type of other biases, it could read, the source created powers. What powers? The heavens and the earth. Why is this so important? Because if we can put the word Elohim back where it belongs, how do we know this, right? How do we know that Elohim is what it is? Well, let me show you. Let me take you on that journey and see if you can't appreciate what's going on. To do that, there's two very important things that we need to do. The first one is that we need to understand that the word Elohim itself is a kind of a conglomerate of a bunch of different meanings, okay? We'll get to that. The best way that we could do this is to just get on the board and start looking at some pictographs, okay? So let's do that. Okay, so first of all, let's just go ahead and write the Hebrew word. In fact, you know what? I want to do this in a very different, I want to do this in a very different color. So we're going to go purple for that. Let's do orange for that, and let's do bright green for that. Okay, here we go. So we have our Hebrew word El, Lo, and actually, you know what? We'll just go ahead and put the vav in here for now. Sometimes it's assimilated, but we're just going to put it in there for now. Elohim, right? Okay. So what do we got right off the bat? Well, we need to get back to some sort of lexical form, right? This is in a lexical form. So what can we do right off the bat to do that? Well, the first thing we can do is understand that it's in the plural, right? So in order to fix this, we're going to eliminate the plural. We're going to eliminate the yom or the yam, or we're going to take away the C from this. You say, oh, wait a minute. Whoa, 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 whoa. What are you talking about? Okay, let me illustrate real quick. And guys, this is why you need to really get your mind wrapped around the fact that the intensification of all power in the universe chose a language that has this level of complexity to communicate his message. All right. This is what Torah was written in. This is what your Bible was written in. You need to get over that fact and not try to argue that fact, because you can't do this with the Greek language. You can't do this with the English language. You can only do this with the Hebrew language. Why? Because this is the word see. Why? Why did they attach the word see to the end of nouns to create plurality? What was the reason for that? Well, it's real simple. The see is what? Mighty, or what? Increasing in number or quality, right? Okay, but our Hebrew word see, yom, or our Hebrew word day, yom, has to do with something very, very specific. And remember, so basically what we have, and I know I'm not going to do the colors right, but basically we have the shore, we have the sea, right? We have waves. You guys remember this illustration? We have the sun, right? Dropping behind what? The Mediterranean Sea. We've got the guy on the seashore. He's watching all this in awe because the sun, the fire in the sky is being swallowed by the sea, so to speak. And so what they did is they called that west. This is the Hebrew word west. This is the Hebrew word right, right? This is the Hebrew word right, as in right hand, etc. This is the whole process of the Hebrew looking out, seeing his friend go out into the sea and get consumed and die, right? This is chaos. This is everything. And this huge, powerful, bright, burning light ball drops behind it and seems to be extinguished by it. And in his philosophy and thought process, he says, this is mighty, this is chaos, etc., right? So the principle is that that's why we have the Hebrew grammar ending im. Elohim is because of the mightiness of numbers, of increase, of multiples, or the strength of something. There are times where plural endings are actually reflecting quality, not quantity. But that's totally irrelevant here, because we're way, way, way past the thought process of Trinity or anything else here. Okay. All right. So now, letting all of that go, we'll go ahead and we'll get back to our discussion about the grammar here, and getting rid of all of that, starting to eliminate the um, the suffixes, infixes, and prefixes to get back to what our lexical form. And so the first thing that we're going to do in our transition is we're going to go back to the Hebrew word Eloah, 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 right here. So what we've done is we've dropped, right? We've dropped that plural ending. Well, what is Eloah? Remember, this is our word in the Hebrew, in the English for God. And actually, you know what? I don't think I want to do it that way. I think I want to just put parentheses here. That's what I think I want to do. Or actually, you know what? I'm going to do one better. I'm going to do one better. Put it in quotes. Why? Because it's English. This is not Hebrew. This is not Hebrew. Okay. So then what we need to ask is, what does this word mean? Well, in the Hebrew, this is an oath maker. Oath maker. Now, what makes it an oath maker? Well, it's actually these two letters right here. The reason for that is because this Hebrew letter is what? It's our guy standing on the seashore with his arms up in the air going, whoa, right? It is behold or bear witness. Okay, bear witness. And then on the other side, we have what? We have the vav, which means what? To establish. Okay. Okay. And so in that thought process, then we can say, okay, now that we've got behold and establish, we know that that's to establish a beholding or to establish a witness. Well, who or what is establishing a witness? Well, obviously, then that's where we get to our parent root. Our parent root is what? It's the aleph. Um, it's the it's the lead ox, okay? And it is the shepherd's crook. Now, we could talk about that in a minute, but for now, let's just accept that an L is something significant in our discussion. To get there, what we're going to need to do is understand how ancient Hebrews thought. Remember, they are shepherds. In fact, when they go down to Egypt, it's offensive that their lifestyle is that of a shepherd. And so they agree to keep sheep for Pharaoh, right? Don't ask me why it's an abomination for somebody to be a shepherd in Egypt, but it was, okay? And maybe we can look into that. But the point being is that a shepherd's crook held the highest symbol or idiom of authority. But then we have what? We have this idea of the olive, right? The skull drawing of the lead ox. Who's the lead ox? Well, now all of a sudden we have an entire story just in this symbol. Back to the complexity. People say, oh, I keep my life simple. No, this is your God's language, people. This is how he chose to write his instructions to you. So you can keep it simple all you want, but the truth is this is the level of complexity we're dealing with. Why? Because we have the ox, But we don't have just any ox. We have the lead ox. Why? Because there were always two oxen. There was a young oxen who needed to be trained in order to know how to be tamed for the yoke. Remember the word tamed for the yoke, right? And so that whole idea had to do with the premise of what? Of walking the line correctly. Ooh, there's our word walk, which doesn't mean walk. It never has, right? Noah walked with God, right? Enoch walked with God, right? We walk with God. When have you actually literally thought in your mind, I'm taking steps with God? No, you think in your mind, I have achieved this level of overcoming sin, and so I'm walking with God, right? And what's interesting is when you're a Jew, the word halakha, which is the word walk, has a whole nother meaning, which means to interpret and potentially properly interpret Torah. So whether you're Christian or Jew, you have a very different idea about the word walk, but it's still not literal. It's idiomatic. Well, here's this huge idiom stuffed into just this one letter, aleph, which is what? That there is a line that needs to be walked when you're pulling the plow. There's a straight line that needs to be, the furrows can't be messed up because they'll cross over each other. And so you're cutting these furrows into the ground, you're cutting them in a straight line. And so there's an ox that's experienced in pulling the plow, and there's an ox that's learning about the plow. And that ox that is experienced in pulling the plow is the lead ox. And that's who this one is becoming tamed to. A greater and a lesser. A receiving vessel and a giving vessel. Oh my gosh, we could go crazy off just this letter. But it means strength. It means strong, because the ox was a strong animal, huge muscles. And I'm not talking about just a bull. I'm talking about an ox. Okay. And now he's pulling this plow and demonstrating his strength and leadership and all that stuffed into just this one drawing, which just so happened when it's connected with the shepherd's crook, all of a sudden supposedly is translated into the English as the word God. But the truth is in the ancient nomadic lifestyle, which we have plenty of reference to modern day tent dwellers in the Middle East who still practice the traditions and claim to be sons of Abraham. Those men and women believe that the clan leader is the lead ox. So the one who holds the shepherd's crook with the genealogy names of his ancestors, proving that he is heir to the clan, that guy, along with the aleph, is the L, who's what? The clan leader. But remember, we've got some other stuff on the board here. So let's take a look. And so in principle, we've reverse engineered this, now we're going to go back to the actual definition of Elohim in the ancient pictographic Hebrew. And it is this: the clan leader who establishes a witness. And then we put that together as clan leaders who establish witnesses. That's an oath maker. The Elohim is an oath maker. Well, why was that then considered to be the word God? Why does that end up being theos in the Septuagint? Right? Why does that end up being God in the English, when we're clearly seeing that this is the clan leader? Why? Because Abraham, when he was experiencing the human sacrifice, exploitation of children, the violence towards animals, and general disregard for life, value, human existence and a complete disassociation from the spiritual, with the exception of the thought process of worshiping other gods, asks the question, who's in charge of this mess? God responds. At which point in time he realizes there's a clan leader in the cosmos. And so now you could see how that could be established as the word Elohim is God. But here's the issue that we have. There is Elohim being used for what? For the word powers, if we accept the translation that I gave you this morning and the grammar to the side of the ambiguity that I've given you. But also we have somewhere it being identified that we are Elohim. And then it says also that man was made a little lower than Elohim. And then we have some other references in scripture about Elohim. There is just a lot of ambiguity to this word, but the truth is if you go back to the ancient pictographic Hebrew, we will understand the thought process here that it is about power. Okay? The clan leader had power, as in authority. The question is did the clan leader have power in terms of energy? Well, when we talk about certain things, for example, when we talk about the Exodus, there's something interesting that occurs where Moses seems to be using his staff to do things that would appear to be in the realm of the practice of magic. And then we start to get into the thought process of what does that entail? Instead of freaking out because I use the word magic, what I want you to understand is it's a connection between the supernatural and the natural, and that it is either being used for an inappropriate purpose or it's being used for an appropriate purpose. Let me give you an example. Genesis chapter 11, verse 9. God, right? Elohim, no, Lord God, Yahweh Elohim comes down from the heavens somehow, right? We're not going to be foolish enough in this complexity of idioms to assign him something like Christophany, where it's supposedly Christ who came down and saw Babel. Or we are not going to be ignorant enough to try to stuff him into a material being when he comes down. But dissension, like our teaching last week, has more to do with a reduction in energy, but not in authority, right? So now he comes down, looks at the city, and says, they are all one. Echad, not Yachad. Yachad is the idea of unity. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. Psalms 133, 1, right? Or maybe it is. Yeah, I think it's 1. Where we have what? Hine matavu unaim shevatachim become yachad, unity. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity. This is not unity. This is something else. And that something else seems to be akin to the one accord in Acts, right? And what happens? He says, they're all one. Now, nothing they endeavor to do will be impossible for them. That's the intensification of all power in the universe, testifying about men, humans, that nothing would be impossible for them. Now, was he being philosophical and saying, oh, they're all together and they could conquer the world? No. We are talking about descendants of Noah, who was a God-fearing or an Elohim-fearing individual, right? Okay. What do I mean by that? He understood powers. He understood authorities. He understood hierarchy. He understood reduction of energy in dissension, right? His grandfather was named Yahad, which means what? To descend. Remember, the Jordan, the Yarden, is actually the descending stream or the descender, right? That's what Yarden means, descender. And what is it? What is the indication there? That it is descending from the Sea of Galilee down into the Dead Sea. Okay, why is all this so important? Because basically what we have going on is this idea that there is just a reduction in energy, but not authority. Okay. A good illustration of this, and maybe it might just make things more muddied for you. And I'm really not trying to. I'm trying to articulate this best I can and help you understand, because when we understand it, then I can finally explain to you elevation, which is what this is actually really about. Okay, so the whole idea here is, remember that I had that idea of there was this dissension, there was this death, there was this burial, there was this resurrection, and there was ascension, right? That was from last week's sermon. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is this thought process of descension. Okay, so when we're talking about descension, there's this idea of walking down a mountain or something flowing down a hill, something moving from one direction or moving from one elevation to another elevation. Okay, and so the whole idea is like, we would think in terms of it being that God actually comes down as if he's up. And notice when I illustrate it, why? Because I still am plagued with Christianese. I still have not gotten my head wrapped around that heaven is not there, but here. Kingdom of heaven, sorry. Okay, so when we're discussing this, you need to think in terms of reduction, not in terms of actual movement in a direction. Why? Because we are governed by height, width, depth, time. Gravity holds us down. Gravity pulls water down. Gravity pulls gold down, right? When I'm panning for gold, I go and I look in areas where it went down, right? Where it fell off a shelf into a lower shelf. That's where I go looking for gold. Why? Because everything for us is down. And so when we think about dissension, that's what we have in our heads. But the problem is that we don't understand the level of emanation present in reality. What do I mean by that? The fireball in the sky that we call sun, which also is, and unfortunately, the name of a deity. We look at that thing and we can't look at it for very long. It's very bright. You know, we were driving the other day and it was like, oh God, I put the visor down. That's not enough. Can't see the road. All I can see is twinkles on the cars. And I'm like, okay, just don't hit that. Right. So the premise is that thing is intense. Heat, radiation, light coming from this thing. If you accept that there was a creator, then you need to understand that he's bigger than that. He's brighter than that. He's hotter than that. He's more intense than that. Maybe I shouldn't say he, I should say it is more intense than that. Because why? Because those anthropomorphic things that we assign to him are just that. They're assignments to help us understand the process of the energy that's occurring. And so when we talk about dissension, one of the things I want you to think about is I want you to think about the dumbing down or the reduction in energy. I gave you the illustration of the 750,000 volts of electricity and the high tension, high voltage power lines that are, running throughout. And they look like giant robots walking down a path. In fact, when I was a kid, I used to believe that that's what they were. Some people think they look like something else. But anyways, the point being is that right there is a lot of voltages. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the process by which somebody has to go repair one of those things. And you have heard the horror stories about a human catching those 750,000 volts and just disintegrating into just absolute hamburger. Okay. It is absolutely dangerous and destructive and completely unusable. So why did we do that in the first place? Well, Thomas Edison and Tesla came up with an idea that we needed to push power down lines to have people have electricity in their home. And thank God we do, because now what? We're reaching people on YouTube. But the principle is the thing that is actually powering all this equipment has less than 200 volts. Whether it be a 120 or a 110, what we have got going on here is less than 200 volts, 750,000 volts. Okay, 750,000. You can pack about maybe 75,000 into a football arena. So then what? We're going to multiply that by what, 100? Or is it by 10? I don't know. Anyways, the point being, it's a lot. It's a lot down to 200 so that we can use it. So this emanation of energy is now coming into existence in a reduced form, right? Does that mean that it is any less? Let me give you an illustration. Like I said, I don't want to muddy the waters. So we have a guy, right? He's a father, he's a husband, let's say he's a boss, and maybe he's a middle manager. So he's a boss and he is a coworker and he is a subordinate. So he has all these different titles, right? But here's the deal. He has children, right? So he's a father. He has children, and those children have not yet arrived at a place where they can necessarily be responsible because they're still children. Anybody who's half a brain smart could understand this illustration. These kids cannot handle life on their own. So they have somebody who's an authority over them, a greater, governing a lesser for the sake of their provision, protection, and instruction. Agreed? Agreed. But let's say that this man gets cancer, and now he is reduced to being in a bed and can barely speak, right? But his brain is still fully intact. In other words, he still has his capacities enough to still what? Govern his estate. And so now he's very, very sick. He can't move. He's got somebody helping him go to the bathroom. He's got somebody helping him eat, but has his authority as a father reduced? No. And that's what we need to understand. A reduction in energy does not equate to a reduction in authority. All right? Now, here's the premise. At that moment that he's on his deathbed, he still has the authority as clan leader. His energy has been reduced so significantly that he can no longer do provision, protection, and instruction, but he still has the staff. He still has the authority. He's still the clan leader. He's still the shepherd. He's still the Elohim. Why is it so important? Because only the clan leader could make an oath with another clan leader. The only way that covenant could be struck is between two Elohim. Do you understand? And so the way that I want you to think about this is that oath maker has to be a clan leader, has to have absolute authority in order to make decisions about covenants with other clans. You following me now? And so in our ancient pictographic Hebrew and in our ancient philosophy, we understand that an Elohim is a what? Is a emanation of the source. How do we know that? Because if okay, let's take for example the earth. He says to the earth, "Let the earth bring forth trees yielding fruit with seed in them," right? On the third day. And so then what? Does it say, and God created the what? The trees? No. It says the land brought forth the trees. Meaning what? The land had some sort of creative ability. Ooh, that's way off from our normal understanding of nature and science and everything else. That the soil itself has creative energy within it. Well, that explains how a seed could go into the ground and die and be resurrected. Does the seed have the power to do that? No, the land was supposed to bring forth trees yielding seed. So the plants come forth yielding seed from what? From the Elohim land. Why is this so important? Because now what we can do is say, okay, does the land have the same power as the source? No. Why do we know that? Because so here's a really simple and crazy philosophy. If there is another God, right? If there is another God, like an intensification of all power in the universe, then there are two and they're conflicting with each other. But here's the crazy part. One has to be greater because otherwise they cancel each other out. That's wave energy science right there. And when we deal with this energy that we're talking about, it's called light, which is what? Particle and wave energy. But the principle is that they would cancel each other out. So if there was an equal and therefore opposite power, then we know that they would cancel each other out. So there always has to be a greater. And if there always has to be a greater, that's where we get the discussion about infinity plus one. No matter how much we try to ascend to that place, infinity plus one will always be one more than that spot. Because why? Because the intensification of all power in the universe is sovereign and is the end all of all energy, creation, etc. That's why it says in Isaiah 45:7 that I, the Lord, create what? Darkness and light and what? Evil and shalom. So when we are dealing with this, I think it's very important to understand that as we go through this process of emanation is this idea of energy going out, but as it's going out, it's reducing in magnitude. Because if there was anything present in that realm of intensity, it would cease to exist. So there has to be a reduction. And that reduction then makes it possible for things to exist. Meaning what? There was power imbued upon the heavens and the earth to be able to do what it is that they were created to do. Land is then what? Imbued with the power to what? To bring forth trees bearing seed. What does that mean for us? That means that whatever we are enabled to be it by being granted an element of energy that emanates from that thing. But a reduction in energy does not equate to a reduction in authority. Therefore, what does that mean? That means that no matter how reduced the energy becomes and what it starts to materialize into, it doesn't lose its original makeup of who it is. Now, where we get into this controversy is because there is a fear and a lack of understanding about Exodus chapter 20, the 10 Commandments. I'm the Lord God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You will have no other gods before me. Elohim before me. Now, in some places, it's Elim. Why? Because that's not an oath maker. That's a clan leader, plural. But that doesn't change the ancient pictographic and nomadic understanding of those letters. The word Elohim does not mean God. That is a misunderstanding. It means plural oath maker. Now, does that plural equate to numbers? No, not if you go back to the idiom of the sea. It equates to quality, not necessarily quantity. Not something that we even remotely need to touch upon the thought process that there's more than one. Oh, we do if we're going to deal with the English, right? We do if we're a Trinitarian, because we don't understand emanation if we're a Trinitarian. We don't understand that that power could be reduced by 1 single percent and not be the source. Or that power could be reduced by 99% and still be that power and still have that authority, but no longer be the source. There's only one source. But the emanation from the source does not change the makeup of the energy. What does that mean? That there is an actual signature of the source in the energy. What does that mean? That means that it still holds the same title. What does that mean? That means that any energy emanating from the source is still the source in the sense of a reduction. Okay, now, having said all that, it's very, very important for you to understand that if that's the case, and we understand that this Elohim that the source created was actually the land and the heavens, or Hashamayim, Haaretz and Hashamayim. Notice I'm putting it higher. Why? Because it appears as though the heavens is a greater and the land is a lesser in our philosophy of the greater and lesser that we learned about. And what was the intention behind that teaching last week? That was to show you that you have to get up under somebody, right? You have to get up under somebody in order to be brought into a position that's higher than where you were. You cannot elevate yourself to a position. You have to be elevated to a position, and that's going to become relevant here in a minute. Now, there are 3 reasons why we need to have that groundwork in place. We need to understand reason number 1 that we need to have that groundwork in place is because we need to come to an acceptance that source does not have a place where we can exist. Source is too powerful, too intense, too huge, too mighty, to whatever the words you want to assign to it with TOO on the end of it, because what? It means it's too much. It means that it's unbearable, that there's just nothing that can exist there, because the moment that you can exist in the presence of that thing, you are that thing, and therefore it doesn't matter anyways. So there had to be a reduction. That reduction then results in what? That removing of the voltages from the 750,000 volts down to what, 15,000 volts at the substation, I think it was. I can't remember that for sure. Maybe it was 25,000 volts. Anyways, point being is that we have transformers reducing down until I have a 1.5 volt plug charging my tablet from 750,000 volts, unbearable, can't exist. If I plug my tablet into that, not only would I cease to exist, but it would cease to exist. It's elementary. So reason number one is that we have to have an acceptance that source is source. That there is nothing bigger. And the only way for something to exist is for it to be smaller, which means there has to be a greater and there has to be a lesser. Okay? Now, moving forward into the second reason why we need to establish this groundwork is because without that acceptance of the first thing, we cannot understand the emanation. Okay, we can't understand how it emanates out into the cosmos, as it were, from that source, whatever. And we're not talking about spatial universe as in astronomy kind of stuff or as in astrophysics or any of that kind of stuff. We're not. This is way bigger, like bigger than the multiverse. Okay. And so in that sentiment, we need to understand that the only way for us to really establish the groundwork needed for the next understanding is that we accept that the reduction does not result in a separate entity. There's a common thread. There's a thread going back to the source. There's this constant and there's a consistent, constant level of energy emanating from source to its final resting place, as it were. And that signature is the same. So if we were to name it something like God, then whatever that energy stops at for the purpose of creation is still God. Okay? All right. So now when we start to get into materialization, this is the third reason we need this groundwork, is we need to understand materialization versus emanation. Emanation is the idea of there being a thread from source to its point, right? So there's an origin point and there's a final point in which that's where it arrives at. Okay? Materialization is what that energy then becomes. Okay? So the reason why this is important is because of what we're going to look into next. There is a premise of a need for protection from the voltages. We have on our power pole out here a transformer that's knocking high voltages down into usable a little over 200 volts. Those 200 volts are then dummied down by other transformers, etc. But the principle is that that's what's being piped into your home, is about a little over 200 volts. Now, the reason why that's important is because that's still dangerous. That could kill you. And so we have to have some sort of shielding, right? We have to have something that prevents us from coming into contact with those voltages. And that's where we have a break in circuit. Okay. So the principle is that the break in circuit then results in what? It results in the energy not being able to come towards us. Let me show you what I mean. That's a break in circuit. There is no longer any power being given to my whiteboard. When I turn it back on, now the circuit is closed, meaning what? Voltage from the 750,000 volts is what? Now being again emanated into the whiteboard, resulting in what? A materialization of what? Of an image. Do you see? And so the principle is that there's an ability to break the circuit. Now, Yeshua says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Paul says we have been grafted into a root. Now, here's how the human brain thinks about that. We have here a tree, and that tree has roots in the ground, and it has a trunk going up and branches going out. And so what do our brains do? Our brains put the roots down. Okay? But when we're talking about Yeshua being the root and us being grafted in as branches, wild or natural grafting, the root is higher in economic status spiritually than us. We are branches. Here's the root. But here's the part that's important, and it is absolutely imperative that you understand this. The human part of Yeshua. When I say part, I'm going to explain this in a minute. The human of Yeshua is the same exact makeup as you and I. Listen, he's in the boat, right? Asleep. Whatever hit the Sea of Galilee had the disciples scared. These are fishermen, okay? They spend their lives on the sea. There is a shore on this side, a shore on this side, and there's a shore on this side and a shore on this side. There is a amount of land surrounding this thing, and yet what? They're afraid. They're afraid. Whatever that thing was, it scared fishermen. Anybody ever watch Deadliest Catch, right? Fishermen are not afraid of the sea. They were. And they said, Lord, wake up or we perish, right? Okay, so, or no, they said, we're about to die, right? Just wanted to let you know so you could say your last rites or whatever. We're done. This is going to kill us. And Yeshua says, shut up, right? And so the sea calms, the storm calms. And what do they say? What manner of man is this that even the winds obey him? And he goes, O ye of little faith, greater things than this will you do. Which one of you in the past week calmed that kind of a storm? Those narratives are literal. There is no idiomatic usage per se being communicated there. There are idioms being used, but that story is true. And that story is true enough to understand that he was trying to tell them that they were the same as him. Now, we have a scripture that says, and Yeshua, knowing all things, that he would be betrayed and that he would have to be committed to the Gentiles and they would put him to death, right? We have a thing saying that, like, for example, when the demon says, what have I to do with you, son of David? Yeah, well, I don't know that I necessarily get referred to that way when a demon comes waltzing around. So there's clearly an authority present. There's clearly a knowledge present. There's clearly an understanding present that is not present in the men who are around him. But he seems to expect them to do the things he does. Raise the dead. Peter did. Right? Heal the sick. Peter did. Right? Walk on water. Peter did. Are you getting my point here? There was nothing in Christ in his makeup as a human or as a final emanation of the source that made him any different from us. Meaning what? When it says we did not consider it robbery with God to be equal with him, he was teaching us the same thing. I'm about to prove it to you. Okay, so we're going to go to John chapter 10. And I believe that we are going to be in, let's see, I think we're going to be in verse, let me find it first and then I'll pull you guys in. Yep. Okay. Okay. So John chapter 10, verse 35. So let's talk a minute about the context here. So Yeshua is having this discussion with people and he is talking about sheep. Okay. Shepherds, right? Nomadic peoples, shepherds, etc. Right. So he's talking about sheep. And he says, my sheep hear my voice, and no one comes to the Father except through me, and all this other stuff, right? So there's this moment, and it starts in verse 26. And I think this is a very important point that needs to be made. And let me go ahead and get rid of the side by side here. Okay, so I tell you the truth. Anyone who sneaks over a wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief and a robber. But the one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And after he has gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him and know his voice, right? They won't follow a stranger. They will run from him because they don't know his voice, right? Now, going all the way down to verse 26. But you don't believe me because you are not my sheep. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one can snatch them away from me. For my Father has given them to me, and he is more powerful than anyone else. No one can snatch them from the Father's hand. The Father and I are one. Okay. So, two things that are very, very important here before we go any further. It is important to understand he was not speaking Greek. He was not speaking English. He was speaking Hebrew, an idiomatic language, and there is things being used. There are words being used here that are not literal, and if you take them literal, you have issues, right? Okay, so one of the things we need to do right off the bat is accept that he said, I and the Father are one, echad. Now, before this, he says what? There's no one more powerful than my Father. Let me read it to you again. I'm not going to share it. For my Father has given them to me, and he is more powerful than anyone else. This is a reference to source, yes? Okay, so if that's a reference to source, and he says, I and my Father are one, then obviously he understands that he is an emanation of the source. And therefore, he understands that that means that there's a reduction in power, but not authority, right? And a reduction in energy, rather. Okay, just like the power lines, right? So this reduction in the energy now equates to this human being who has an understanding about his origins in the source. But is that anything different from us? No, not according to him. I'm about to show you in a minute. But here's the key, and this is important. Translators and people who don't understand the word Elohim have not gotten their minds wrapped around it, even though that emanation is absolutely present in the verses to begin with. I'm going to explain. And so now what we're talking about, or what we're going to see, is this idea that when it says, for my Father has given them to me, and he is more powerful than anyone else, he's referring to source, and no one can snatch them from the Father's hand. The Father and I are one. Now let's see where this goes. Once again, this is not the first time. Once again, the people picked up stones to kill him. Kill, as in what? Cause his body to expire. This is not the Hebrew version of death. This is stones hitting your head until you go unconscious and you are not able to process the things needed to stay alive anymore. All right? This is dead. Why is that so important? Because remember, death was a penalty for sin. Death is a penalty for sin. There were sins unto death, and there were sins that were not unto death. 1 John chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. So if there are sins unto death, those are punishable by death. They pick up stones to stone him. Why? What are they saying? Yeshua says, at my Father's direction, I have done many good works. For which one are you going to stone me? Okay, we're dealing with a very, very intelligent human being. We're dealing with somebody who knew the future. So he had the gift of seeing, right? We're dealing with somebody who had an extraordinary understanding of who he was in terms of emanation. And he says, why are you going to steal? Why are you going to stone me? What the works that God has told me to do, which one are you offended, or which one is wrong? Which one is a sin? Right? And the reason he says that is not playing dumb. He's asking them for a reason, okay? But here's the part that's important. What their reply is. They replied, we're stoning you not for any good work, but blasphemy. You are a mere man claiming to be God. Remember, we're dealing with English here. What language were they speaking? What were they saying? Right? You make yourself equal with God. What did Paul say? He didn't consider it robbery to be equal with God. What was Paul trying to tell us? He was trying to tell us how Yeshua understood his identity. Okay, now, here we go. They replied, we are stoning you not for any good work, but for blasphemy. You are a mere man claiming to be God. So what is blasphemy? Where do we get that? We get that idea of what? Taking the name of God in vain. So let's talk a minute about the emanations of the scribes. In Genesis chapter 18, Abraham is interacting with God, and there are times where Abraham talks to God in such a way that they actually changed it from Lord, capital Lord, to Lord, capital L, lowercase ord, or Adonai, right? A reference to Adonai actually changed the word from Yahweh, Yod He Vav He, to Adonai, right? Aleph, Dalet, Vav, Nun, Adon, Lord. Because why? Because they didn't like how Abraham was interacting with God and was given the impression by those verses that he was equal with God. Why was this so important? Because the sentiment of a Jew, or the sentiment of a Jewish leader, and the philosophy and theology was that humans were common. They were unholy. They were sinful. They were what? They were unclean. And so how could you possibly be God? Right? And so in their minds, his name was being taken in vain by the fact that Yeshua was claiming that he was equal with him and therefore was him, as it were, and therefore the name of God was being made common. Okay, so that's the thought process behind the word blasphemy that's used here, blasphemos, which is used in the Greek. Okay, but the premise of blasphemy is they say, you are a mere man. What? Oh, you're a human. Just like you and just like me. You bleed. You get hungry. You sleep. How could you possibly be an Elohim? And what does Yeshua's response? Oh my goodness. And here's the funny part is this is all happening during Hanukkah. I won't get into that though. Okay. And you know that the scriptures, okay, so Yeshua replies, it is written in your own scriptures that God said to certain leaders of the people, I say you are gods. Okay. Now there's a couple ways that we could go about discussing this. The first thing that really needs to be understood is that word gods is not the word that's being used in the Hebrew. But we're going to also go with, why are they trying to kill him? Why are they trying to kill him? We're still going to go with that. See, that's the part that people miss in this. People will go to Psalm 82, where all of this is, which we're going to take a look at. They will go to Psalm 82 and they will look at those things, right? And they'll say, oh, yeah, no, it's supposed to be translated judges or leaders of the people, right? And that kind of thing. But Yeshua interprets the scripture, not the Septuagint, but the Hebrew text, to say that when this psalm was written, not sure who wrote it, right? I think it might have been attributed to David, and it may actually say, and I may have I've forgotten this, but point being is doesn't really matter who wrote it. Somebody's claiming that they are Elohim, that God says that they are Elohim. Okay, so obviously we need to go to Psalm 82, but before we do, I think you can understand that they were going to try to kill him, as in expire his body. Why is that so important? Because sins that were punishable by death had to go through a judgment. On the mouth of two or three witnesses, let every judgment be established. And what? Those of you who make the accusation, you are the ones who have to carry out the execution. Meaning what? This was serious. They were thinking that he was reducing the name of God. And if he was making the name of God common by claiming that a mere man was a god, then they had right to stone him. And he says, no, excuse me, your own scriptures say, when God was speaking to certain leaders, that's going to be important here in a minute, certain leaders, that you are all Elohim, right? You are all gods. And what's interesting is when it gets translated from the Aramaic into the Greek, the Greek word being used here, look, let me show you. The Greek word being used here for the word gods is theos. Theos, as in God, G-O-D. You are all gods, not judges, not leaders of the people, right? This is change. This is a game changer for the word Elohim. Because now what? Hashamayim and Haaretz are gods. But what you need to understand is that all that means is that they were given a certain amount of energy and a certain amount of authority to accomplish a purpose in the creative process, which we as humans have already been given that ability as well. How so? The creation of life. Stop trying to manipulate it. Stop trying to say, oh, I was created by God. No, you weren't. You were created by your parents. Stop trying to make it into a mythology and accept that this is the process that God created and this is the power that he has given us. What you think that Peter was somehow some special guy who was unconditionally elected and was forced into salvation and now could raise people from the dead or tell people to die or make prophecies about the future or set doctrine or command the sea or walk on water. Come on, people. Come on, people. Peter was like you and me. And if there's a moment where God chooses to imbue somebody with power, fine, amen. That's a sovereignty that he has. And obviously, when I say he, we're talking about an emanation, not the source. Okay, so now we start to get into a little bit of controversy. And that controversy has something to do with what is known as the divine council. So what we need to do is we're going to go over to Psalm chapter or Psalm 82. Okay. Psalm 82. Oh goodness. I'm having technical difficulties. Are you shocked? Okay, here we go. Yes, it is a Psalm of Asaph. My mistake. Okay. So God presides over the heavens court, right? This is supposedly the divine council. But let's see what it actually says in the Hebrew, okay? It says Elohim, right? Okay, so what have we learned about this word Elohim? This is the oath maker, which means it's the clan leader, right? This is the clan leader, as it were. But what do we also understand about this word Elohim? That Yeshua attributed it to being equal with God, right? The people interpreted it that way, and Yeshua turns around and uses this psalm as his argument as to why they shouldn't stone him. Okay? I hope, okay, look, I hope you're starting to get this. Yeshua says, I and the Father are one, right? The people react and want to stone him. His argument back is, you already were told you were gods. Why are you tripping? Why are you going to stone me when you're gods? That's what he was saying. And he says, the scripture cannot be broken. I don't know how many people have read this part in the gospel and just right over it, not realizing what Yeshua just did. He made anybody who's being spoken about in Psalm 82 equal with God, one with God. I and the Father are one. Okay, here we go. So Elohim, Netzav. What's Netzav? Netzav is to stand, right? To stand upright. Elohim Netzav. So what? The powers, what we see is the word God, stands upright. What's this? In the witnesses of. Let's take a look at this, right? The congregation are gathering from the Hebrew word witness, witness, from the witnesses of. How do I know it's witnesses of? Because that tav is there instead of the hey, meaning that I'm supposed to interpret this as of, or it is in construct form, meaning you put the word of in it. Witnesses of what? El. What's El? What's El? The clan leader. Which clan leader? Are we talking about a microcosmic clan leader? Are we talking about a macrocosmic clan leader? Are we talking about a cosmic clan leader, right? Are we talking about the intensification of all power in the universe, et cetera, et cetera? Well, let me tell you what it doesn't say. It doesn't say the heavenly court, right? Elohim stands what? In the witnesses of El, or the witnesses of the clan leader, or the most important or most authoritative. Remember, it's the strong authority. Stand in the witnesses of the strong authority, right? And then Bekerev. Bekerev. What's Bekerev? Kerev means to draw near. Draw near, right? In the midst or among, from the idea to come near or approach. Okay, so now Bekerev Elohim. So what's this saying in the English? It's saying his own in the midst of the rulers he judges. All of a sudden, Elohim, okay, guys, you had to see this. Elohim is translated God in the English here and leaders in the English here. Okay? Right? And then what? Yeshvat. They draw near to the judge, or he draws near to the judgment of the leaders. Okay, so what we need to do then is we need to readjust this and say that this is what? Powers, as in authority and energy, right? We've already established that. Why? Because of its first usage. Its first usage is something that can bring forth trees, or something that can bring forth birds, right? The Hashamayim or the Aretz. Okay. All right. So now the principle is, what you need to glean from that is what we're talking about is creative authority and power. Creative authority and energy. That's the word where we're going to use energy. Creative authority and energy. So getting back to this now, we have the creative authority and energy stands stands in the middle, or in the witnesses of the authority, right? And draws near to the creative power, or creative authority and creative energy of judgment. What is judgment? An equal distribution of reward and consequence. Now, that's the beginning of Psalm 82, but let's go down to the verse that we need to talk about here. I say you are gods. You are all children of the Most High. What does it actually say in the Hebrew? It says, Ani amarti. What is that? I say. Do you see ani is actually, remember when I was talking about the ambiguity of the grammar? Now we have the subject at the start. Ani. I say. Ani amarti. I say, right? What? I say Elohim atim. Elohim atim. Elohim atim is what? Gods you are. Gods you are, right? And then what? uvnei elyon kilehem. Sons of the highest. Sons of the Most High. Sons of the Most High, right? You are. Again. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. What is the difference between a son and a father? The difference between a son and a father has one simple process. Jurisdictional versus sovereign authority. The rest is all the same. If you have a son, he has the same bone structure, the same skin, the same genetics, all the same things. Okay, there may be defects, but that's a different story. My point is that he's just as human as you are, and he was born, his brain was born with the capability that it has when it dies. In other words, what you were born with, brain-wise, you are stuck with now. Your intelligence, your processes, all of your ability to exist was present in the day you were born. So with him, it is the same. In other words, when it comes to son, there is a reduction in authority, but not a reduction in energy. Okay? So an emanation has a reduction in energy, but not in authority. But a son has a reduction in authority, but not in energy. Why? Because the jurisdictional authority or agency of the clan leader falls to the son who inherits that information. The guy who has the shepherd's crook does not have an infinite list of names. There's a first name at the top of the list. That guy's sovereign. Everybody after him inherits it. That's why we're called sons of man. Son of man, right? That's what Ezekiel is referred to during dry bones. He says, son of man, son of Adam. Can these dry bones live? Why was he calling him a son of Adam? He was trying to tell him, I have given you jurisdictional authority over Achetz. I have given you dominion over the earth. And you were about to exercise that. And that's why I'm going to refer to you as the son of Adam, because you have that inheritance and you are about to tell these dry bones to live. You're going to raise up an army. Okay? All right. Now, the reason why that is important is because when we're dealing with a son, there's a reduction in authority, but not in energy. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong. We still have that idea of emanation. I mean, you would agree a child is weaker than an adult. There's still an emanation. There's a lesser, right? But what? But that son has the same sovereignty, as it were, albeit through agency, as the father does. And so as a result of that, what do we have? We have a B'nai Elohim, or a son of an Elohim, now being what? The emanation, but having a reduction in authority. Okay, and I know one sounds contradictory to the other, but the way that I want you to think about it is an Elohim versus a B'nai Elohim. A B'nai Elohim obviously has a reduction in authority, but not energy. Okay? All right. So now, as we're going through this, and I understand that already you're probably like, oh man, this is so confusing. But the way that we're going to look at this is after we finally establish these truths, because remember, Yeshua uses this scripture to argue that they shouldn't stone him because he claims that he's equal with God. He uses this scripture that refers to us to argue that he shouldn't be stoned. Do you get that? Yeshua called you a God. There's not a whole lot you can do to try to twist this and translate it differently, and it just stands how it is. So then what we need to understand is, what is it then that we are? Are we a son, or are we an Elohim? Well, according to this, we are an Elohim, or sons of the Most High. Okay? So obviously there's two separate things going on here. But now what I want to do is go ahead and I want to look back to something. Okay? Something that a lot of controversy occurred. We're going to talk about this divine council thing, where they're saying that this is a group of gods that Yahweh is in charge of, who have authority over the earth. A group of gods, what we call the divine council. And there is a lot of followers of this philosophy. But what I've established with you so far is that that's not what this verse is talking about. So if this isn't talking about the divine council according to your Messiah, then we need to understand Genesis 6 differently. We go to Genesis 6. Verse 2. The sons of God saw the beautiful woman and took what they wanted, and took any they wanted as wives. Let's look at that in the Young's literal real quick. And I know it's just going to probably be translated horribly, even in the Young's literal. And the sons of God see the daughters of men, that they are fair, and they take to themselves women of all whom they have chosen. Why would that be important? That the sons of God see the daughters of men? Because sons of God refers to an emanation, daughters of men refers to an inheritance. Let me explain. In principle, the way that you need to look at this is that the divineness that was present in these men who were supposed to be godly, let's call it, okay, were actually what? Stepping into a realm of attraction to women who did not have the identity of Bat Elohim, or daughters of God. Okay, so let's talk a minute about gender. So in Torah, we see a clear gender inequality, a greater and a lesser. We see the wife being treated a certain way versus the husband being treated a certain way. In fact, a majority of the scriptures in Torah have something to do with the protection of the family, protection of the wife, protection of the servants, protection of the children. Okay? But there isn't anything for the protection of the men. All right. And so in that principle, we understand there's a gender equality. We've talked about that about 3 weeks ago. But now what you need to understand is that when it says B'nai Elohim, or it says B'nai Israel, speak to the children of Israel, we need to accept that Torah definitely makes a distinction. How do we know that? From the daughters of Zelophehad. The daughters of Zelophehad, it says, speak to the children of Israel. There's first is a commandment. Speak to the children of Israel and tell them when they go into the land that their allotment falls to such and such, and this is how you would give it to your children, right? Well, then the daughters of Zelophehad come to Moses and say, our father died in the wilderness and in sin, and he had no sons. So are we just supposed to not have an inheritance, even though that we were, just as much the children of Israel as anybody else? And of course, some versions actually say, speak to the children of Israel. No, it says sons of Israel. Okay. And so we see a distinction being made that the men are the ones being given the inheritance. And only if there's no son born to a man does the daughter get the inheritance. Okay. So that's Torah, that's kind of height, width, depth, time, that's that extent and thought process. But now what we need to do is identify what the idiomatic question in our minds would be for the word bene, okay, or for the word son. Because if we're just to accept that men are only sons of God, then women should not have any spiritual manifestation of energy. So when Paul says, the Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, technically speaking, if we set the gender inequality that's clearly present in Torah, then there should be no manifestation of, not manifestation, there should be no expression of spiritual gifting in females, which is totally not true, right? We don't see that anywhere present in any of the processes. We see women prophesying. Look at when Yeshua was born, Anna prophecies, right? And so, and look at Deborah, right? Look at the judge, Deborah. She is a prophet, right? Okay. So the reason why this is important is because then we understand that in the world of emanation, the word son means something different. Well, in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, it literally means tent continues. Okay. It's a drawing. In fact, let me go ahead and show you that. Let's just go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, so in the process, we have the word ben, right? Which is what? It is the drawing of the tent, which I know that doesn't look like a tent. In fact, let's just go ahead and we'll make it just a little bit more illustrated here. The drawing of a tent, right? And that's a little bit long. And then we have the drawing. So we have the drawing of the tent, right? And then we have the drawing of the seed sprout. And this is so when we're talking about the seed sprout, let's talk about that for a second. The seed sprout is actually a sign of the next generation. How so? Because it's a seed that's died and resurrected, right? It's a seed that's died and resurrected, meaning what? It came from a parent plant. A seed just doesn't appear out of anywhere. It comes from another plant. That plant had its coming together of the two principles, the masculine and feminine principles, and created a seed. That seed now is a sprout. That sprout proves what? A cycle, and is the next generation, and therefore means in the idiomatic understanding, continue. So what is this? Tent continues. Tent continues. Why is that important? Because tent continues then gives us an idea that it's not necessarily a son, right? Because it takes two to tango. It takes a feminine principle and a masculine principle. It takes a reception and inception to create a conception. And that conception then becomes what? The next generation, which continues the tent. It doesn't have a gender. Next generation is either gender. The reason why this is so important is because when we talk about B'nai Elohim, or sons of God, we are not talking about angels. Okay? We are talking about humans, but we're talking about a specific kind of human, and that's what we need to get to next. Okay, so what have we established so far? We've established that there's an emanation from source. That emanation gives that emanation gives energy and authority to whatever materialization it then becomes. Right? Okay, So we understand that emanation is still source. It's just a reduced source. We don't call electricity something else because it stopped being the 750,000 volts. We call electricity electricity because it still has the same composition as the source of the electricity. You see? Okay, and so God, 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 God. Understand? As a title, as the thought process of emanation. Is it a reduced version? Yes, of course. If I was to emanate the stuff that comes from the source, this area would cease to exist, right? So I'm a very different filter of emanation, which brings us to the idea of a blocker or something that is reducing, okay? All right. So the way that we need to understand this is in terms of what we should be doing as humans versus what we do as humans. And here's the part. We got to talk about this blocker. So let's go back to our board, and we have this Hebrew word salem. Okay, salem. Sal im. Okay. And so the premise is that this word is, in fact, let me go ahead and show it to you. It is going to be in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Okay. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. And it says, God said, let us make man in our image. Let's go take a look at it. That word in the word image is salem. Salem. Image. Okay? Image. But if we were to take this word back to the ancient pictographic Hebrew, let's see, I need to we're just going to paste that Strong's Concordance number in and search for Tselem. Okay? And what you're going to find is that Tselem is from the root, the parent root, which we will go back to here. So, okay, which means what? Shadow. You want proof? Watch this. We will go to what? We will go to Psalm chapter 23. Okay, and we're going to go to right here, verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, Sal Mavet. Sal Mavet. From what? The root word Sal, which is what? Shadow. Okay? Shadow. Okay. So that being the case, then we go back to this over here, and we understand that this is not the Hebrew word for image, but the Hebrew word for shadow. Okay? Shadow. Okay. Now, why is that important? Because our parent root means shadow, but we have this augmentation over here of what? Of chaos, of water, whatever, of mightiness. Okay. But however it works out, what we have is we have this other letter augmenting that word shadow. But regardless, it is not image. This is, again, a problem with the English. It is not image. We were not created in the image of God. We were created in the shadow of God. I'm about to show you what that means. So now we have a source of light, right? Here is a source of light, and it is emanating light. Now, as long as there is nothing blocking it, if there was, say, something down here, right, there would be no stopping that light. And if we accept that this is the source of all energy intensified in the universe, then this, what happens to this? This ceases to exist. Okay. And so that means there had to be some sort of what? Of blocker. So let's get rid of these for a second and let's talk about this. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a blocker. We're going to create something that interferes with that light, right? Remember, there's going to be a reduction in the light because the light is what? The light is destructive. Okay. And so we have some light getting through, right? And some light not getting through. But what happens where there is no light? There is a shadow. There is a shadow. There is proof that the light was blocked. There is a shadow. The shadow is what? A reduction in light. Now, what's this blocker? Above my pay grade. But this is what you are. You are evidence that the light was blocked. You are a shadow. That is you. Okay. So when you are created in God's image, as the pulpit likes to claim, you are proof that the light got blocked. Or what? You are a lesser emanation. Okay. You are a lesser emanation. Now, the principle is that the void, right? That's a vessel, that there's no light present. And let me change this color here real quick. There's no light present in this area, right? There's no light present there. There needs to be light because why? Because it is void and without form, as it were. And so as a result of that, there is a statement said by source, right? Of let there be light, right? That's the principle. Let there be something where there was nothing, and let that thing be the exact representation of what this is, only reduced. Okay? But now, here's the interesting thing about it. Because of the fact that there needs to be, okay, let me express this real quick. There is a protection in Torah against forcing someone into a situation that they are not justly supposed to be in. There is a protection of justice for people being forced into death. Remember, on the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let a judgment be established. And then those who accused are the ones who are supposed to throw the stones. And so in that process, then there is an understanding that there is a protection of the human being from death, right? There is a protection of a woman in her virginity. There is a protection of a woman from being forced. There's a protection of family members from having to participate in those type of things. There is a protection of slaves. There is a protection of the body through a commandment on what should be consumed, right? Torah is about protecting. So why all of a sudden out of the middle of nowhere do we think that God's just going to force himself? And remember, I used to be a Calvinist. In the philosophy of Calvinism, there is something called irresistible grace that says that if God elected you, then you have to be saved, right? And so the principle is that no matter what you do, you will come to salvation, that the circumstances will always push in those directions. But the truth is one of your human endowments is what? Willpower, the power to choose, which means what? You have to request by demonstrating yourself to be a vessel of reception, you have to request the light. Meaning what? This right here, let's see, I want to do a different color here. This right here is an act that is voluntary, an act of will to receive that light, right? To accept that light, to become that light. Now, so what I want you to think about now, how is land existing and heavens existing in that first verse if source is so intense that nothing can exist next to it? Because if it did, then there would be two and they would cancel each other out. What is the principle here? The principle here is that even land had to accept the designation as being land and accept the imbuing of energy and creative authority. In other words, free will is the authority to choose to be a creator. Free will is the authority to choose to decide what to create and how to create it. You have to make a conscientious choice to make a child. Now, I'm not factoring in force because that's a human behavior, not a God behavior. And if we are sons of God, then we do God things. If we are sons of men, then we do men things. Which is why there's two designations there. You are Elohim and you are sons of the Most High. Meaning what? There's a progression there. It's about to get even more interesting because now we need to go into Psalm chapter 8. Psalm chapter 8. Okay? Psalm chapter 8. And this is what it says in verse start. So let's start in verse 3. For I see thy heavens, a work of thy fingers, moon and stars, and thou didst establish. That thou didst establish. What is man that thou rememberest him? The son of man that thou inspectest him, right? And it actually says visits him. And causes him to lack a little of Godhead. Okay, so let's talk about this. This is one of the more controversial verses when it comes to the Septuagint. In the Septuagint, the Jews who translated this verse translated it as you have been made a little lower than angelos, angels, angelos, right? Angelos is messengers. You've been made a little lower than the messengers. Why did the Jews change that? Because again, they do not want Gentiles thinking that they are equal with God, right? What is man that you are mindful of him, right? What is man that you are mindful of him, and you have caused him to what? Lack a little of the Godhead? No, that's not what it says. Let's take a look at what it actually says in the Hebrew. So this word right here, chesed, chasar is lack or without or being less than. Okay, so let's talk a minute about that. When you are disobedient to Torah, you need to remember obedience to Torah demonstrates what? An abundance, which is more than what falls on the just and the unjust, right? The only way you could be demonstrated as being blessed is if you got more than what the rest of the world was promised. Well, what happens if you are in disobedience? You fall into lack and decrease. You fall into an area where all of a sudden the value of your time has a reduced income or a reduced increase on it. So the principle is if you violate Torah, if you break the rules that God set forth for all of humanity and gave Israel the stewardship of teaching it to humanity like I'm doing right now, then you would what? You would have a less than the just and unjust. Right? Because why? Because the unjust are just choosing to flat out be unjust. The just are choosing to flat out be just. You're choosing to violate God's instruction, even though that you were told to do it, right? The unjust don't necessarily have that instruction. So now as there's a reduction in your increase and what's being brought in, what should have been abundance or what should have at least been the promise to the world now has become even less. That's the principle here. That's the idea of there being a reduction, emanation, right? Okay, getting back into our verse. So we have chasar, which is a reduction, right? A reduction, and then what's this? Ma'at. Ma'at. Littleness or fewness, right? So he has made us littler or fewer, right? Sorry, let me get back into that interlinear here. Nope, that's not it. Less or fewer from, and here's the thing, from less than, but then we have the mem next to Elohim. What's that mem next to Elohim? That's from Elohim. So you are lesser from Elohim. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, so what this just did is tell us there's an emanation. This just told us that there's a source, a bigness, and that bigness is reduced or made less from that bigness, which is referred to as Elohim, but then we're referred to as Elohim, which means what? There's different levels of Elohim. And boy, if we were just to assign the G word to it, you guys would have a fit, because what am I saying? There's little gods, bigger gods, bigger gods, bigger gods, a big God. But we're not using the G word, are we? We are using that concept of the oath maker, who's what? Has the highest authority to what? Negotiate covenant between what? Another Elohim, another clan leader, right? And so if we're going to negotiate covenant between two Elohims, then obviously there's what? There is the potential to have a greater and lesser in an Elohim. Why? Because covenant always has a lesser. There's always somebody who needs the protection and always somebody who has the protection in a covenant, or you don't enter into covenant. And of course, what did Yahweh do? He can't swear by anybody else, so he swears by himself, right? Because there is nothing bigger, nothing higher, nothing equating to an ability to say, I will be held accountable to this covenant by this human being, right? Okay. And so the premise is then that it says, and then it says with weightiness, right? Weightiness, and with crowning, there has been honor, right? Okay, so what? There is a jurisdictional assignment of authority upon whom? Upon whom? Who are we talking about here? We are talking about, let's go back. We are talking about Anosh. Anosh. Anosh is the idea of there being a masculine principle, right? So what is man that you are mindful of him? What is the masculine principle that you are mindful of him, or that you visit him? That's the Hebrew word there, visit. That you visit him. You have made him a little lower, not than the angels. That's the Septuagint. The original manuscript Hebrew text says you've made him a little lower than God. Or look at how Young had a struggle with this too. He says you've made him a little lower than the Godhead, or lesser of a Godhead. But if we go back to your Messiah, Yeshua, he says you're a God. But then we can't use that G word, can we? No, because why? We need to go back to this thought process of Hebrew understanding of emanation. And now these verses come together and make sense. But what does that mean? If there is a son of God and a daughter of men, then we need to understand that that equates to a premise of shadow, okay? Of shadow. So let's talk a minute about this. This is the idea of you being able to resist the emanation. Well, isn't that strange? Because that would indicate that something could actually what? Challenge the intensification of all power in the universe. But the way that you want to think about it is not in terms of equal and opposite reaction, but instead in terms of resistance. Because remember, no power, no energy, right? No energy, no power. There is no actual emanation going on right now. But if I return to this, then there is emanation. And so as a result of that, the way that you want to think about this is that you have the ability to be emanation. You have the ability to actually be the you have the ability to actually be the energy and authority of the source reduced, right? And it actually says that creation's waiting for us to do this. But what I want to talk to you about today is elevation. And what I mean by that is where do we get the emanations? And this is where it gets heavy. Because what I want you to think about is when Peter walks into the temple, the man who's sitting in the temple, okay, he is what? The man who's sitting in the temple, he is a cripple, right? He's somebody who's been crippled from birth, lame from birth, unable to, and we could probably say muscular dystrophy is most likely probably what this man had, which is an inability for the genetics to tell the muscles to create mass or to increase in mass. And so they stay atrophied or they stay weak, right? And so now here comes Peter. He comes along and he says this. He says, silver and gold have I none, but what I have give I thee in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Get up and walk. And the man immediately gets up. Now, there are two things that are important there. The man could not get up on his own because his muscles did not have the ability, which means what? When he got healed in that moment that Peter spoke those things, at that moment when he spoke those things, he was what? He was exercising jurisdictional authority granted by what? The sovereign. And that jurisdictional authority granted by that sovereign gave him the ability to tell his body to heal. But then there's something further. There was energy that caused a change in the natural order process of that genetic disease. Meaning what? Energy alters the status of something. Let's go back to our father who has cancer. The father who has cancer, he is what? He is weak but still has this sovereign authority. But let's say that he regains what? His energy. He regains his stamina. He regains his muscles are no longer atrophied. He is done with the cancer, and he's now what? Made whole again. And in that process, he now has energy, right? And so energy, all it is some sort of force that causes an economic change in the status of something else. Okay. And so we know that it is actually a work, or it is an actual force that moves in a certain direction. But what we need to understand is that that energy that was present in Peter was what? Known in our vernacular as the what? Set apart or Holy Spirit. Now, why is that important? That's important because what we understand then is that Peter had to alter the status of that man, or elevate him into a status in which he then could move and have those things. Was the man any different from Peter? Did the man still have the emanation from the source as being an Elohim? Yes. But something was limiting his belief about that. Peter comes along and he elevates the man using authority and energy to elevate the man to be on equal status with Peter, just like Yeshua did with him when he stepped out of the boat. Peter was fully Elohim as he stepped out of the boat. Or, if we want to use the G word, Peter was God as he stepped out of the boat. But when Peter swore that he did not know Yeshua, Peter was Ish, or Peter was Adam. He was B'nai Adam. He was a son of Adam. He was not allowing the emanation to flow and materialize in him as a creator. Remember, just as the land was given the power and authority, he was given the energy and authority to create. So also you have been given the energy and authority to create. That's evidence in procreation. You say, well, what about the animals? They don't have the four human endowments. They don't know I. They're not sentient. They don't have conscience. They don't know the difference between right and wrong. They don't have willpower, and they don't have imagination. When we are dealing with this, it is important to understand that you are a spiritual being having a human experience, but you can choose to be a human and not have a spiritual experience. You can turn off the switch. And in turning off the switch, you will continue to be a B'nai Adam, but you will not be a B'nai Elohim. Now, what does that require? Well, one of the things it requires is a clear conscience. There's only one religion I know of in the world that offers a clear conscience based upon a meritless imputation. What do I mean by that? Christianity is the only religion, not Islam, not Judaism, which are the other two Abrahamic religions, and we'll just go ahead and eliminate the other religions out of the list because they're not Abrahamic. That might be biased, but you'll understand why here in a second. The premise is that a descendant of Abraham was going to bless all the nations, right? Well, that descendant of Abraham was Yeshua, and the process of Yeshua was what? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. Who said that? Paul said that. Muhammad didn't say that. A rabbi in Israel didn't say that. Paul said that. Why is that important? Because that means it's exclusive to Christianity, which means that is the only faith in the world that actually offers an imputation of merit that you actually don't earn. Okay. So a clear conscience based upon meritless imputation. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us that we might become the righteousness of God. We need to believe that we are the righteousness of God and that we can't add or take away. Remember the illustration of the sun, where we have the sun shining and there being what? Heat, light, and radiation. And we can't think anything or do anything bad to take away from its power, right? We can't take away from the sun's energy because we sin. And in the same way, we can't do anything good. We couldn't be so philanthropic. Oh my gosh, I can't say the word. We could not be so generous in our process that we could actually make the sun shine brighter. The same is true of Elohim. The same is true of Yahweh Elohim. And if you think about this in terms of understanding now that Yahweh Elohim is a higher Elohim than you are, but it's just in the sense of what? Of emanation. In other words, that's where that energy materialized. And so therefore that is serving a purpose at that level, imbued with power from source. Then Yahweh himself is actually what? A materialization of what? Source. Is Yahweh source? Yes, but only in the perceivable understanding. As a father, as a king, as a husband. And so when we are going through our understanding, we need to understand that what you are is exactly what Yeshua said you were. And if we go with the English, you are a God. And if we accept that, instead of being all scared of it because it's some sort of blasphemy that these idiots were going to stone Yeshua for, and he sat there and said, well, come on, you guys are that. So when you get to stone yourselves too, because you're equal with him too. That's what he was trying to tell them. That was the argument he was making, and he said scripture couldn't be broken. What does that mean? That means that obviously there's some stuff we're missing because we've gotten so caught up in being afraid of being understood as something divine. I will propose to you that the people who do not like that they are being told that they're divine are people who don't want to be divine. My scripture says I'm a son of God, and if I'm a son of God, then I do God things. And God things, the last time I checked, are not just the regular humdrum of life. They're greatness. And there's energy involved, resurrection, healing, right? Abundance, the head and not the tail. And not only that, but there's a higher self within you that can guide you if you would just listen to it, because it's been around a lot longer than your little logical human brain. I know that this flies in the face of everything you've learned about Christianity, about the Trinity, about God. But when Yeshua sits there and says, the kingdom of heaven is within you, you probably need to readjust your thinking. Because how many of you, when you hear the parables about the kingdom of heaven, think it's up? How many of you, when you hear the parables about the kingdom of heaven, think it's some place outside the cosmos? No, it is in here, because you are an emanation of the intensification of all power in the universe. Now, what does that mean? That means for those people who do not want to accept that, or who don't understand that yet, you have to be that to them. You have to be a God to them, which is exactly what Moses was told by God. He said, you will be a God to Pharaoh and what? And Aaron will be your prophet. You will be a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be your prophet. And Moses uses an object imbued with power to activate plagues. That object imbued with power had nothing to do with the idea that the object was that way separately, but no, as a result of Moses being an Elohim. Remember when he comes down off the mountain or comes out of the tent of meeting and has to put a veil over his face because the people can't handle how bright he is, how intense he is? It is time to let go of your fears, your reactions, your preconceived notions about the word God. And I still have to use it because the audience I'm talking to does not perceive that we are an emanation of God. And therefore we are God. And Yeshua said it. And when the people got bent out of shape, he said, look, your own writers said that. Asaph said that. And you just didn't get it. And I'm here to teach you that that's what you are. And I'm here to show you that there needs to be a spiritual evolution. And until we wake up and start doing that, we're going to continue on this cycle, this loop of being human. Now, I don't know what all that means, and I don't know to what level that goes, but I do know that the end result is a necessity to let go of some things that we have thought about us. Now, I've made the mistake of just out of the blue stating to someone, oh, we're gods. And of course, not only did I lose them, but they started rumors about me and everything else, right? But the point is now you understand the process on how I arrived at that thinking. You see how the Hebrew works here. And you see how the Psalms understood it. And we see how the prophets of old, the patriarchs of old, the beginning peoples manifested it. And even manifested it in an inappropriate manner in Genesis 11. Tower of Babel. If we could possibly let go of the premise that it's some new age belief and that you are actually an energy being, and that energy being is actually a direct download, as it were, of the intensification of all power in the universe, then you could understand that there's a uniqueness to you on how that is going to emanate to lessers, right? If you are the greater vessel and there is a lesser vessel, you understand now how you are actually filling that other vessel with what is already coming down in a constant flow or beam to you that you have materialized as this thing. But you need to understand that what you are is just a reduced version of that, and that has given you the ability to have creative authority and creative energy. I don't know what this means beyond just giving you that information, but obviously it was time for it to happen. I had multiple questions about Psalm 82, multiple questions about John 10 this week, and I said, okay, I guess it's time to give to you all this information, and you do with it what you will, because this is what I'm going to share with you. If we literally read the book of Revelations, which may be a dangerous thing, there seems to be a communication both in the idioms and in the literal that there will be a time when humanity will be what? Exercising spiritual energy and authority for a malevolent purpose. And I propose to you that we are behind we're behind in what we need to know and learn compared to the workers of darkness who have communicated these things to each other via their practices and their writings, that we have been so afraid to even think about or discuss, for fear that we might be deceived, for fear that we might be overcome by a demon. Do you know what you have to do to get a demon? Right? I don't even have to explain it, but I can tell you it's not something that just happens because you trip over a rock. It's a process, and it is a willful process. And so don't think that you're just going to get in all kinds of trouble with God because of this. I'm repeating what Yeshua said. So maybe we should go ahead and let it go, right? Maybe we should try to see what it means, because this is the last point I want to make. There is an apparent, definite, clear increase in energy and authority in the disciples as they began to receive this power and accept it and understand what it meant and what to do with it. Now, did Peter stand up and preach and say, "You're all gods"? No. But he walked that out for real. And so did Paul, shaking his snake off. Well, yeah, you don't mean anything to me. I have absolute authority even over your venom. Right? And the energy within him was such that that venom couldn't even touch him. And we're still trying to figure out how to get through our health issues through the use of the manipulation of synthetic pharmaceutical materials. So, in the end, I think the most important point is that you have been wrong about your understanding of your reality, because you've been reading an English Bible. And I apologize, but those of you who think that, oh, God gave me this Bible because I am an English speaking person, you are so wrong. Because the philosophies and the theologies that were being communicated by the disciples were augmented by those cultures who originally arrived at your language anyways. In other words, American Christianity is not first century Christianity. And you're just going to have to get over the fact that they had something else going on. And if you want to be a part of it, if you want to be what they were and not be this mess that we've become, then we're going to have to change our thinking. We're going to have to change our behavior. We're going to have to change our faith actions, right? We're going to have to change how we walk our walk with God. There's that word walk, idiomatically used. Right? We're going to have to change those things back to an ancient Hebrew nomadic thought process, lifestyle, and philosophy. Because if we don't, we're just going to stay where we're at. And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. Why? Because there's no such thing as stagnation in humanity. You are either going up or you're going down. You're either descending, which is eventually going to result in death, or you're ascending as a result of tapping into what? The resurrection power, as a result of what? Elevation. You are being elevated. Somebody has come along and changed your status. Yeshua came along and he changed your status from sinner to righteous one. Righteous one being what? The righteousness of God. There's that G word again. What's the righteousness of an Elohim? Well, obviously, a very different righteousness than a human being. So I'm going to leave you with that. And I know that I've stepped on all kinds of toes today. I know that I have been offensive. I know that I have probably turned the Christian systematic theology upside down, but I'm also showing you what your own Messiah said. And it's time to get over it. So for those of you on YouTube, I would say Shabbat Shalom, and I will end the live stream. And for those of you who will be staying for the Midrash, I will need a